Welcome back everyone to the weekly Mailbox, your chance to ask me questions about anything you would like. Formula 1, Formula E, motorsports, anything in between. And for your chance to be featured next week, leave a comment down below, Twitter, Instagram or the YouTube community page. Just want to quickly apologise for the couple of day delay on this week's episode. Technically this is last week's episode and there will still be another one at the end of this week, but I've been preparing for 2020. Lots of content coming your way this week and next, because next week, ladies and gents, we return back to the racetrack, back to Grand Prix racing. Cannot wait. But today we've got 5 questions, 5 very unique questions, starting with this one coming from Twitter at AlphaD56. What if Sergio Perez is loaned to Renault by Racing Point / Aston Martin and Vettel takes his now vacant seat at that team? What do you think? I wanted to start off with something a little bit different. I think a lot of the stories going around at the moment will be about the season restarting. I know the race and a different couple of media outlets have been focusing on different circuits we could potentially go to. But I thought to myself that could be fun to answer next week. So next week I want to see your questions about the 2020 season if possible. But I wanted to start today with Aston Martin, with Sebastian Vettel, because this has certainly been one of the bigger stories over our current lockdown situation. The big rumours that Vettel could retire, that Ricciardo could take his place, obviously all boiled over with Sainz going to Ferrari, Ricciardo going to McLaren. What an amazing period that was for F1 news. It's starting to tone down a little bit now, but still the result of all those changes is that there's a vacancy at Renault, and we also don't know where Sebastian Vettel is going to go. Now, I've made it very clear that I do not think Vettel will go to Renault. I don't think it's a project he will particularly be interested in, and I think if any team would interest Seb, it would be Aston Martin. And I really like what Alpha's done here in the fact that he's kind of gone with my feelings as well. He's obviously thinking along the same route, that the Aston Martin project could be a really fun one to bring on a 4-time world champion like Sebastian Vettel. They're a team looking to make it to the top, and bringing in a big name like Seb would be a big move. I also think Perez is also a very good driver and also fits that role quite nicely. He's just not quite as marketable here in Europe. He doesn't have any race wins. He doesn't have any world titles. And that could be a difficult situation. And I've also mentioned before that I think Lance Stroll, now that the team is aiming to be at the front, now the team is going to be rebranded Aston Martin, there'll be less wiggle room for Lawrence Stroll. He will still have the majority power to make the ultimate decision on who's in that car. But I think Stroll, it won't be as easy of a ride like it already has been. So what about Perez? He's under contract. He's one of the few drivers, actually, that has a contract for next year. Most of them are still waiting to see what's going to happen. I think he would understand if he got loaned out to Renault, but I'm not too sure how realistic this is. From a Perez point, I think Aston Martin and Renault both have an equal chance of jumping the field when we get to 2022. And in actual fact, last week it was announced that Aston Martin, Racing Point, whatever you want to call them, are going to delay their new factory, so potentially that could push them back another couple of years in terms of development. Whereas if Perez can go on board with Renault, he could potentially become the team leader. He's got far more experience than would be his teammate, but it's his teammate that's the issue. Would Renault want Sergio Perez alongside Esteban Ocon? I don't think they would. And so on paper, whilst I think Perez, who the team at Racing Point owe Perez so much for his countless podiums, the way he carried himself through that administration process a couple of years ago, he really is an incredible asset to that team, and I think they would be silly to get rid of him. Bringing in Vettel probably would be a fantastic replacement if they were looking to get rid of Sergio, but I don't think realistically that's something they're looking at, and I think putting him alongside Ocon is not really what Renault need. They have already had slight fireworks in the past with Magnussen and Palmer. That was a spicy relationship, but they were still rebuilding then. I think their relationships between drivers since then have been very, very good. And I think to go down this route would be a shot in the foot, shall we say. Question number 2 comes from Axel 0007. Will George Russell's success in the F1 Virtual Grand Prix give us a reflection of his talent when not restricted by the Williams pace? Or is a game just too different from reality? I've kind of kept a similar stance with a lot of these questions over lockdown about the virtual GPs, whether that be Formula 1, whether that be the race at home with the Formula E Championship that they've done. They've done a virtual Le Mans as well, haven't they? The 24-hour. Which F1 driver won that? It's skipped my mind. Someone will tell. Was it Gasly and Verne? Their team? Did they win it? Anyway, you'll let me know in the comment section down below. Focusing on George Russell and games in general, I have very much kept the mentality that it is just a game. However, there will be those that take it seriously. And for those that take it seriously, don't ruin it for them. And George Russell is someone who's not only taken it seriously, but has improved massively. The first couple of virtual Grand Prix, he was okay, but it didn't really look anywhere near challenging for victories. And then won, was it 3 or 4 in a row in the final few races? I know the final race in Canada, there wasn't nearly as many actual F1 drivers. And his closest challenger, really, before hitting the wall of champions, was his teammate Nicholas Latifi. Just because he's quick on the F1 game, obviously does not mean he's going to be quick in an F1 car. I don't think that translates whatsoever. However, what I think does translate is his attitude to work, his attitude to learn how to set up a car, his attitude to keep improving, keep getting better, and the way he's just presented himself throughout the entirety of the series. And yes, there's always been moments of a bit of fun, but for the most part, he's been very, very professional about it all, when a lot of drivers, understandably, have been a little bit more chilled, a little bit more laid back. And I think that'll be something that Mercedes will look at, though it's insignificant in the grand scheme of things and results on the actual F1 track is truly what matters. Certainly this will be a nice little stamp on his CV, I think would be a nice way of putting it. And I think the way he's carried himself through the entire, what are we about, 10 weeks, maybe even longer of the virtual Grand Prix, he's been a credit to the sport, to be totally honest. And I think already last year, a lot of us thought that Russell's got some pace. And I think by winning this and winning it comfortably, I think Mercedes will take him a little more seriously. Nothing too crazy. And he has to perform this year. He has to smash Latifi like he did Kubica last year. But I think already Russell's in a very good place for his future in Formula 1. And I think Mercedes probably already know what they're going to be doing, when they're going to be changing drivers, but they're not going to let us know for a couple more months, or maybe even years. Who knows? Question number 3 comes from Javier H. Which reserve driver would you like to see get a chance this season? I'm not too sure if this means which reserve driver would I like to see race in a particular Grand Prix. And if I'm being totally honest, reserve drivers change so quickly in Formula 1. It's kind of hard to keep up. And a lot of teams have several test and reserve drivers. It is a little bit messy at times, especially when you throw in the spanner of Red Bull and AlphaTauri and Ferrari and Alfa Romeo. But anyway, I included this question because something I forgot about this year, and I'm not too sure if they're actually going to do it with all the new rules going on at the moment. I might have to ask people who are more clued up on the the new changes for this year, but I think it's still going ahead that at least one of the rounds this year, we were supposed to have each team during a practice session run a youth driver, a rookie, someone who'd never taken part in a Formula 1 Grand Prix before. And though, yeah, there will be drivers like the KFC man Sean Galale, has the best Formula 1 or Formula 2 helmet of all time, the KFC bucket. But is his pace realistically there? No. Will he probably get a chance this year in an AlphaTauri testing role? Most likely, is what I would say. So, most teams are going to end up running some kind of reserve driver at some point. I'm excited to see Mick Schumacher in a Formula 1 car. I think a lot of people are. I'm excited to see Robert Schwartzman if he gets a chance in an Alfa Romeo, a Haas. Guan Yu Zhou is someone who massively impressed me in Formula 2 last year, and I'd love to see his pace in a Renault. I also think as well someone maybe a bit further afield. We saw last year Naoki Yamamoto in Japan do a FP1 session for Toro Rosso, and maybe someone like him, maybe a Nick Cassidy from Super Formula, maybe even a Yuri Vips who's now gone to Super Formula, even a Jamie Chadwick who is part of that Williams test setup. Someone like that who isn't necessarily next in line to jump into a Formula 1 car, but it would be a brilliant opportunity for them to prove they can do it, and that you don't always have to go through the traditional routes to get to Formula 1. And for someone, I think especially like Yuri Vips and Jamie Chadwick, not going through Formula 2, but still being able to win races in their respective categories, and maybe even get a chance at the big leagues. Maybe, this might be a strange one, someone from Formula E, a youngster like Maximilian Gunter, who's at BMW. Maybe, that's very unlikely, I would say, leaving a BMW role, but you know what I'm kind of getting at here. Someone who's never had a chance, but could surprise a lot of people, a lot like Yamamoto last year. Question number 4 comes from Victor Monk Knudsen. I think I've got that right. Winter testing showed Ferrari maybe being slower than Red Bull. After the break from the sport, could Ferrari have caught up to Red Bull or even Mercedes again? This, of course, is going to be a huge question mark going into the first race of the season next week. Because, yes, in winter testing, I think a lot of the experts, a lot of people with far more aerodynamic and engineering knowledge than me, pointed to the fact that Ferrari could be off the pace of those top 2 teams. And whilst I wasn't that convinced, I don't have any kind of degree in engineering or expertise in engineering, so what do I know? I'm just going off the fact that you should never read into winter testing. So whilst Ferrari could have been behind, don't forget we still had about a month until that opening round in Australia, and we've seen several years in a row, really. Mercedes haven't necessarily been the quickest in testing, but they've used that knowledge from testing to upgrade their car, reshape their car, and ultimately come out on top in Melbourne in terms of pace. Ferrari very easily could have done the same this year, but of course we never went racing in Australia. We then traditionally have a kind of Spec B car, a Ferrari Part 2, a Mercedes Part 2, McLaren, whatever, show up in Spain. But we've now passed when that would be. We've comfortably passed that. And which I always find really strange, we're kind of heading towards what would have been the end of the first half of the season and charging towards that summer break. So you think about how some of the cars look in testing traditionally and how they end up looking by the time we get to Belgium. We're kind of going to have that kind of development. And so it's realistic, or not impossible, to say that I think the top 3 teams not only will remain the top 3 teams, but I think it'll be very, very close indeed. And I said it last year, at the end of the season, we're going to show up to each Grand Prix not having a clue who's going to win. And I think it could be a very similar story for 2020. But I don't want to spend too long on this one because ultimately it's been such a long gap. The whole grid could, theoretically, flip on its head, and Williams could be that's some kind of sick joke, isn't it? Sorry, Williams fans. But Williams certainly could be another team in that midfield that could jump up right up, maybe to 7th, maybe even kind of 6th, if they can really nail it with development. But the answer is we won't know until next week. And our final question comes from No Name. It's an audience participation one. And as always, I want to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now, I quickly hesitated there because I think this is one that I don't really want to know your answers because it's going to upset me. So just bear that in mind, ladies and gents, that there's a Grosjean fanboy here with delicate feelings when it comes to Formula 1. But the question is the 2020 season a make or break season for the Haas drivers? Grosjean does crash a lot. I don't like that. And makes many mistakes. Okay. Whilst Magnussen is reckless. I think that's a bit harsh on both of them, but we'll continue. Plus, both of them in the same team has been a disaster, especially in the 2019 season. So, is this a make or break year? I think it is. But kind of what I want to know from you guys is, who would you bring into Haas if you were to let one or even both of them go? I think saying that the last 2 years has been a disaster, or 3 years, isn't it? They've been together now. Saying it's been a disaster is a little unfair. 2017, Grosjean certainly had the edge, but Magnussen was getting used to that team and car. And it was, whilst Magnussen is Magnussen, and he's certainly one of the more aggressive drivers, drivers are aware of that, and I think reckless would be a little extreme. 2018, Magnussen, for the first half of the year, was almost faultless and slipped back a little bit in the second half when Grosjean finally got his act together. But Grosjean was pretty dreadful in those opening 7 or 8 or so rounds until Austria, and got that confidence boost with a 4th place. And last year, I don't really think you can blame it on either driver. I know a lot of people mentioned they crashed into each other in, Spain, Britain and Germany, but only Britain were the one where they retired from the contact. Spain, Grosjean lost a lot of points for that, but it was only a slight tap into turn 1, and a lot of teammates make contact like that once a year. Germany made no difference whatsoever, and Britain was the tiniest bit of contact, a little bit like the 2 Ferraris in Brazil. I think even less contact than those 2. So I think saying last year was a catastrophe and blaming it on the drivers is very harsh. But I really want to know your thoughts on this one. They're a team that I think could be a bit of a dark horse in 2020 in that midfield, but it could equally swing the other way, and they could be right at the back of the pack fighting with the likes of Williams. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do, as long as it's good stuff on the track. But certainly with both of them out of contract at the end of the year, I'm a bit clueless in what the team's going to do. They've kept Grosjean for this long. They've kept Magnussen for this long. Is it time for a change? I want to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And as always, I want your questions for next week, 2020 based if possible, looking at the season ahead. But of course, if you've got a belter of a question about anything else, throw it in the comments section down below. Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. Keep your eye on the channel over the next few days. Hopefully, well, I say hopefully, there will be plenty of content building up to the new season. I cannot wait to launch that Thursday preview video next week for Austria. We're almost here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for watching. If you've made it this far and you haven't already subscribed, feel free to do so. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.